Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, this is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 10 o'clock p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. And it's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. I appreciate everybody who's tuning into my shows. I mean, I tell you, I just can't believe how many people are listening to my shows. I started this 2 years ago, November 2009, and November will be 2 years, and I've done like around 800 shows, somewhere around 800 shows. I wanted to do 1,000 shows by November, but I don't know if I'll be able to do that. But that was my goal, and I wanted to. I did about, over 500 shows, probably over at Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here on Blog Talk Radio as well. So the course of a couple of years, I've done about 1,400 shows, and that's a lot of talking, and that's a lot of people listening. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that. I like to listen to people's shows here too on Blog Talk Radio, and lately I have had a little bit more time to do that. But I was so busy that I didn't even have time to listen. I love to listen to hear what people have to say. So I appreciate everybody who's taken the time to listen to what I have to say about child abuse prevention, and also my own story. And in hopes really just to promote education and awareness. Really, that's really why I'm doing it. It's also my healing journey. Like one child abuse survivor, gather really in the morning is my process. It's what I'm doing to heal, from the wounds and the scars of child abuse, and learning, how to handle things, how to cope, and how to perceive things differently. So that's my healing journey, and a lot of people tune in for that. I really appreciate it because it's not fun to listen to. And like these shows I've been doing at night, child abuse prevention and human rights abuse prevention is Up to Us. I've been mainly focusing on child sexual abuse for the last 2 or 3 months. So I mean, it's just something that's just because I'm working with this in my own healing journey right now. So I felt kind of compelled to talk about it. It's something I'm dealing with in my daily life right now, and so, I've always had to deal with it. But the issue is that now I'm really dealing with it because I'm trying to heal it and trying to move, forward. And it's a slow process. It takes time. It's taking me time. I don't know about anybody else, but it's not something I can just get over or just say put it behind me. That's what I was doing, was just kind of not looking at it, right? So I'm just talking about it. So it's a very sensitive subject. Talking about abuse of any type of abuse is a sensitive subject. So you have to know what's good for you to listen to. And I always put a discretionary warning on my shows. They're not for younger children. My shows, there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and I just feel like they're really for adults. And if you're under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows. Have an adult or somebody listen to the show with you so they can help you make a decision whether you should be listening or not. I have no idea who the people are how young the people are who are listening to my shows, right? And if you're sensitive to the topics of abuse, then you may want to turn the show off. Like, I'm talking about abuse, it's a very sensitive subject, and I don't sugarcoat it. I just tell it like it is. And because I grew up abused in every way, and I grew up in a hellhole of a house, and with people who were, had the intent to hurt people. You know what I mean? So I grew up being abused in every way, and so this is part of my life, right? I can talk about it, but not everybody can hear about it. So you got to make sure that this is okay for you to listen to. If you're a survivor, you got to know that it's not going to trigger you. There's a huge issue with triggering. Any information like this, doesn't matter where it is on the web, can trigger people, even on TV, in daily life, right? So you have to be very sure that this is something you want to listen to, and make sure you do that with all of my shows, right? So we're going to get right into this. I found some information on Web for Health, and that's www.webforhealth.info. And looking at the child sexual abuse and the effects and the consequences of child sexual abuse, and just kind of a brief little overview. But I was kind of going through it, and they had some pretty interesting stuff to say about it. It's all pretty well out there. The symptoms, the cause, the effects, from child sexual abuse, what will happen to many people. Not everybody will experience the same things, and not everybody will have the same degree of problems, right? And I know, like, I've seen that in my own, I wouldn't name names, but I know lots of survivors of CSA and incest, and, some people seem to be pretty resilient, seem to be going along pretty well, and other people are really not doing so well. Myself, I'm about middle of the road. I think I'm high functioning, so I'm doing really well, but I'm still having some difficulties working through things, and so it's very, very hard on people. So I want to kind of look at some of these consequences of child sexual abuse. And so they say, depending on the seriousness, the duration, the sort of abuse, some of those who were abused in their childhood or recently retain certain problems due to this trauma. These can be divided into psychological, social, sexual, and physical problems. So they said psychological problems can be things like fears, panic attacks, sleeping problems, nightmares, irritability, outbursts of anger, and sudden shock reactions when being touched, this type of thing. And that's kind of for any type of abuse, not just child sexual abuse. Any type of abuse or neglect can cause that kind of stuff. Any kind of trauma, right? Little confidence and self-respect and respect for one's own body may change. Behavior that harms the body, addiction to alcohol and other substances, excessive work or sports, depression, self-destruction, and prostitution. These are things that people can do and get involved with because they were abused as children. And like I said, not just child sexual abuse. This is really pretty well standard for what happens to children who are abused. You know what I mean? And this is just what they know by the studies that they've done. So, fears, panic attacks, sleeping problems, nightmares, irritability, outbursts of anger, sudden shock reactions. We might not have all of those, survivors of abuse or child sexual abuse. That so many people do have these problems, if not one or two or whatever. I don't have panic attacks, so much like panic attacks where I can't breathe and can't focus. I'm able to keep it all together pretty well because I've been in some pretty scary situations where my life's been threatened and literally with a gun to my head and stuff like that. And I've been kidnapped nearly 5 times, things like this. My family was abusing me. My parents were, I've had to live with this sort of thing all my life. So, I don't really panic necessarily. But I have a lot of anxiety because of that, so I have a lot of problems with anxiety, and I think that's probably why I smoke cigarettes. It's just something that keeps me sort of, leveled off, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, if I can have my cigarette, everything's all right. And so I use cigarettes for that. I was using drugs for that for many years, and at the age of 21, I finally got off the drugs, and I just, but the last remaining thing that I do that's unhealthy for me is smoke cigarettes, right? And I'm still trying to get rid of those, but I need to work on myself first, I think, before I'll be able to do it. Things like sleeping problems. I've always had a problem sleeping. I wasn't sleeping well as a child, that's for sure, growing up in that home. And I certainly, and then because I didn't sleep well as a child, I sort of developed a habit of actually being mostly awake even through the night. Like my sweetheart who lives with me says that half the time, when he wakes up in the middle of the night, he sees that I'm actually sleeping sitting up. So, I don't really sleep all that well, you know what I mean? I sort of sleep on half an elbow. I'm always up and alert, and I think that's just from being, having to be so alert in my home, right? And also just being sexually abused by my brother, raped and sodomized. So, these are things that can happen to people, sleeping problems, nightmares. I used to have a lot of nightmares, and I don't have very many nightmares anymore. As a matter of fact, I haven't had one for a long time. I used to have nightmares about my mother abusing me, mainly my mother, and now I don't have those nightmares, so I don't know. I have a lot more peace in my heart these days. It's been something on my healing journey, but nightmares are a real problem for people who have suffered from abuse. I used to wake up in the middle of the night just crying and just sobbing and just saying, my mother abused me, my mother hurt me. That was just because I was dreaming about what she was doing to me, having these nightmares of the flashbacks really of the abuse, right? Irritability, that's an issue that can happen to people. Become very irritable, irritated, right? Outbursts of anger is more something that I have, that I especially used to have in my 20s. I did get it under control. I guess it manifests in other ways. Low tolerance to certain things, you know what I mean? Like low ability to tolerate certain things. But outbursts of anger, I don't really have a problem with that now, but I know when I was younger I did, and I used to get thrown out of places like airports and, thrown out of places where I made a scene and was actually removed, or that I'd be, charges would be pressed against me, that kind of stuff. But that's from growing up in a violent home. That's how I was treated, you know what I mean? So I was just modeling my parents' behavior of, being in everybody's face and being violent, being threatening, outbursts of anger and that sort of thing, right? Like as far as my own personal journey, my healing journey in the last 4 years, I haven't had any real outbursts of anger because of my healing journey. I think it's appropriate anger. I did about 6 months study on anger. That's probably why. I really took a real hard look at anger, what it is and what's distorted and what's proper anger. And it really helped me to see that that there's ways to handle things and there's better ways to handle things. And so I don't do that sort of stuff. But I used to when I was young. Sudden shock reactions when being touched. I used to have more problems with that than I do now. Like I don't have near the same problems that I used to have with people touching me. I used to hate when people touched me when I was younger. And even into my 20s and 30s, still had a bit of an issue with it. And I really don't like people standing behind me. That's also another issue, and I think that's just most people are like that. But especially when you grow up abused, you need to be able to see the room at all times. And I was listening to a show actually not too long ago, somebody's show about that, and they were saying that that's very true, that they needed to be able to see the door, to see the room, for their own protection. And I know that I've always been like that. And I'm always very conscious of who's around and who's looking at me, who sort of scoping the scene out, never able to really relax, and that's a huge issue for me. Little confidence and self-respect and respect for one's own body may change because of abuse, especially child sexual abuse. And I know for myself that's a huge issue, with my own body image. And so many people, even if they weren't abused, have that issue. It's just a real problem. People just have problems with their own body image, but especially, being abused. I know I grew up, when I was growing up, especially being around 11, 12 years old, pre-puberty, I hated my body. I hated the changes that were happening to it because I didn't want to be a woman, because I was raped and sodomized as a child. And also I had witnessed my dad raping my mother one time, and my dad was always abusing my mother, very much serious, heavy-duty domestic violence and abuse in my home. So my mother was a woman, and it's not that she was weak, she used to try to defend herself. My dad was just stronger than her, you know what I mean? And so she wasn't like a weakling, I didn't consider her to be weak. She used to beat on me, and she wasn't very weak. My mom was my main abuser, so she was a pretty strong woman. But the thing is, I witnessed what happened to girls. Girls get raped, girls get hurt, girls get slapped, girls get beat around, right? So in my mind, I really didn't want to be a woman. I didn't want to be a girl, So as soon as I started to become a more mature, adolescent, my body started to change, and these changes started to happen, and I really was not comfortable with it. And not only that, but I had some sort of sexual abuse from my dad going on, where he would ogle me when I was in the bathroom, in the shower, and stuff like that. He would walk in and he wouldn't leave. He'd just stand there and ogle me, and so. My family was just rife with all kinds of abuse, for child physical abuse, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse, right? There was a lot of sexual abuse going on, a lot of, just a lot of people just hurting people. My parents were mentally ill. Both my parents were mentally ill. And when they were brought up on charges, child abuse charges, they had to go for psych evaluations, right? And the courts wouldn't, they were demanding psych evaluations because my parents were brought up, both of them were charged with child abuse charges, and they were diagnosed with lots of mental problems and mental disabilities and issues, mainly due to their own abusive backgrounds, because both my parents were abused as children, and they never worked through their stuff. They were born in the 20s, you know what I mean? Like that back then, nobody was working on anything. It was just like what you do. You just abuse your children, right? Pretty sad and pathetic, but that's pretty well the case. And they grew up in a very ignorant little backwoods, back hill town, where you could just kill your kids and get away with it. My grandmother did. And so, yeah, my grandmother, she was a murderer, and she got away with it. She killed her son, and she got away with it. And, she was trying to kill the kids too, but, they managed to live. But that's my mother's mother, right? So my parents had a lot of problems, and they just didn't get any help. And so there was, every kind of abuse really was present in my home, and it was absolutely horrific. And the damage that it did, as far as the psychological damage, was huge. Not just the physical damage from the physical abuse and the physical beatings and being raped and sodomized. I had a huge problem with my own, like, who am I? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't really, like, I didn't have time to grow properly, or time to even, enjoy my childhood or being a child, because I was too busy trying to stay out of the way of people because they were hurting me, you know what I mean? So, I did have crayons and coloring books, but it's not that I found any real joy or, contentment to sit and color, because there was always somebody fighting or somebody getting hurt. The knowledge that my dad could come home and beat on my mother, the knowledge that my mom could be mad at you for some reason and decide to beat the shit out of me. So, it was always living, it was a fear, it was a home full of fear. It was a home full of darkness and a lot of sadness and a lot of grief and a lot of sorrow. There was a lot of pain and misery and suffering within that home, right? And so that's just how I grew up, right? So it's pretty incredibly hard to come out from underneath of something like that. But so many of us have lived like that and have experienced that, and it does a lot of damage, in one way or another, right? All of us are different. So behaviors that harms the body, addiction to alcohol, other substances, excessive work or sports, depression, self-destruction, prostitution, these types of things can happen, especially regarding child sexual abuse. Well, because I was abused as a child, I was always really engaging in a lot of high-risk activities. Like I would jump from things and jump from walls, and I didn't care if I broke a bone or not, because I was already being abused, and it really didn't matter to me. I was really trying to hurt myself all the time, you know what I mean? Especially when I was young, you know what I mean? Like somewhere after the age of about 10 years old, I realized that I was dead. It didn't matter to me if I lived or died. So I became very involved in high-risk activities, and I used to use drugs and PCP at the age of 12 years old, angel dust and stuff. And I would just be as high as I possibly could be, and I used to find ways to get a hold of drugs. I had just about every avenue you can think of to do that, and so I could get my hands on things, you know what I mean, 12 years old. And the issue is I was high all the time until I was 21 years old, right? So there was a couple of years where I actually kind of wasn't doing too bad in school. My 11th and 12th grade of high school, I actually turned it around and did pretty good, but I was still high. I was still using drugs, and it did a lot of damage to my body, and it did I'm sure it did, and it definitely had an effect on my body because I was using, cocaine and speed and meth and, whatever I could get my hands on, and not small quantities. I'm talking, whatever I could get my hands on. So alcohol was not really a big issue for me. I used to drink when I was young. In high school and stuff, just at school mainly, just walking across the field, getting drunk before my English class. That was my thing to do. But, I didn't do too much drinking because there was no alcohol in my home. My parents were not drinkers. They were not alcoholics. They were very well, they hid it very well. People have asked me that. They said, were your parents alcoholics? And I just never saw my parents drinking, and you could smell alcohol on them. Some people say, well, that's not necessarily, doesn't mean anything, Then one of my brothers actually said that, that my mother was a bit of a closet drinker, but I never smelled alcohol on her, so that's why I was always, I don't know, because I know what booze smells like. I was drinking it, at the age of 12 years old. My mother was beating the crap out of me until I was 17, so I was like, I don't know, I just never smell any alcohol on her. I don't see that in her, but my mother may have been a closet alcoholic. I just don't know. But I just turned to drugs mainly, and it was hard. At the age of 21, I decided to get off the drugs. I knew it was going to kill me. I was going to end up in the gutter. I was following right after my brother's footsteps, and they were nearly dying. And one of my brothers killed himself at the age of 33. The one that raped and sodomized me killed himself, and so I knew I was headed for that same direction. He was a cocaine addict, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to end up just like that. I'm going to be dead in the gutter somewhere here in a couple of years. And from a drug deal gone bad or whatever, I'd already been had a lot of issues with drug deals gone bad, and had guns pointed at me, at my head and stuff, and had to work my way out of that type of stuff. And I thought, man, I'm just going to go down in a really bad way. And I really decided at the age of 21 I didn't want to go down like that, and so I changed my life completely. Had to get, sadly enough, I had to drop my friends that would not climb out of the pit with me. And I wrote about that in La Vida Juvis. That's the book where I detailed that sort of the beginning stages of that whole thing right there in La Vida Juvis. And I hope everybody will get a copy of that. That's my story, another one of my stories, and it's one summer, just looking at one summer with my friends, and these were all people I cared very much for. Many of them are dead now, and some were murdered, some were killed, and some I just don't know where they're at. It's pretty sad what this type of stuff does to people, and I've seen the worst side of humanity, you know what I mean? That's pretty much, just about as worse as you can get. Maybe not the worst, but I'd say very close to it. And so it does have a profound effect on people's lives, as far as excessive work or sports, being busy all the time. I have to be careful not to just be busy all the time, because I need to be able to relax and to cope and to deal with what I need to deal with, and also to stop and smell the roses. I'm a woman, so I might be doing that, or stop and watch a sports game if you're a guy. Like, we do have to, allow ourselves time to just relax, you know what I mean, and not just run all the time, so we don't have to cope with what we've had to go through as children. I know that I did that for years, just going, because I couldn't stop just to sit down and say, okay, I need to deal with this until I was 41 years old, and I was contemplating another suicide, and I thought, man, what am I doing? I'm still sitting here, so many years later, doing the same thing I was doing in my 20s, doing in my 30s, really doing as a teenager, wanting to end my life, wanting out of the pain. How am I going to do this? And I thought, wow, I'm going to have to get help. It was really kind of stupid that it took me that long. But everybody's different, and some people won't realize things until later. And I'm just glad I finally realized it. I say better late than never, that's for sure. But self-destructive behaviors, depression, things like this can happen, and prostitution, I didn't have a problem with that. I didn't want anybody touching me. Being raped and sodomized by my brother when I was 8 years old, I was like, okay, nobody gets to touch my body. And then having been beaten and abused by my mother, it was like I really didn't want anybody touching my body, looking at my body, or seeing my body. You know what I mean? I wasn't just molested like at night. You know what I mean? Like my brother raped and sodomized me in a violent attack. I was bound and gagged, and he just took it upon himself to hurt me badly. And so, because I was fighting him, it was a violent assault, right? And so, it continued on for about 7 months. Some of it was in the daytime, some of it was at night. And so I have these memories and these images of the whole thing. And the sad thing is that you can't go back and change that. There's really no way for me to go back and change that. So what I'm having to do is work through the process of allowing myself to feel what I need to feel about it, because I shut it off for a long time. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to look at it, didn't want to know about it. I had people, like I talked about on a show not too long ago, one of these shows here last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, where I went to the gynecologist to get on a pill for the first time and get a checkup, at the age of 21, and right around 21 years old, and actually it was because my brother had killed himself. It was actually after that, because I met this guy that I really wanted we were going to get married. I mean, it was serious, man. And so I had to go get my checkup anyway. I thought, hey, I'll just get on the pill, and I told him I was a virgin. I filled out the card, that I had never had sexual intercourse before, and I was a virgin, right? And so I went in, and they did the exam. The woman did the exam, and she's like, honey, you've written here that you're a virgin if you never had sexual intercourse with anyone or anything, and that's not the case, honey. You're not a virgin. I'm like, well, yes, I am. So I really talked about that not too long ago on some of my shows, but that's just where my mind was. I just did not want to sit there and tell that woman that, my brother raped me and sodomized me and continued to sexually use me for quite a while. I just couldn't bear to say it. I couldn't even bear to think about it, and it was just something I had to put away. I had to put away for a long time, and so now I'm having to deal with it. I'm finally having to face it, and I'm glad that I'm doing it, because I'll be able to feel so much better about things once I'm done. But it is hard in the process, and so I always, I encourage people, if you're listening and you're a survivor, right? Many survivors listen to my shows. Make sure that you get some help. If you can't cope and you're doing this on your own, like I'm not really on my own, right? I have support. Like I have friends. I don't have any local support. I don't have anybody to hug me or to hold me. My sweetheart he's terminally ill. Like he's got his own set of problems, and every time he sees me get hurt, his nose bleeds. That's how sick he is. Like he can't deal with this stuff. It will kill him. You know what I mean? Like his health is so fragile that when he gets upset, his nose bleeds. He just literally he ends up in the hospital. And so when he thinks about me being abused, it just kills him, right? And so he basically has to not be a part of it. And so, I'm on my own in it, except for I have some awesome friends, and I have a really good friend who's working with me pretty much on if not a daily basis, on a few times a week to get through this stuff. So I'm not really on my own. And so it's really important to make sure that you have, if you can reach out and find somebody you really trust, and you have to make sure you really trust this person, whoever these people are, whether it's a counselor, therapist, or, you have to make sure that they have your best interest at heart. And, make sure that it's somebody you can really trust. It's good to have some support. You know what I mean? It's really good to have some support. It's the first time in my life where I've actually had some support, to get through this stuff, right? So it's great. Social problems, have little confidence in other people. That's a huge issue. It may not just trust issues, and it's always going to be an issue, and I think everybody should have trust issues. You just can't trust everybody, right? I found that out. I couldn't even trust my parents. I found that out. I couldn't trust my brother, too. I loved him. That's too bad, man. He hurt me. And, this is really sad. You can't trust everybody. You pretty well can't trust anybody unless they prove themselves trustworthy. And, people, there's ways to go about doing that. You can see what's going on in the person's heart. You can see what's going on, but you have to sort of give it some time and not go in blindly to relationships, right? Because People have the potential. Anybody, me, you, anybody has the potential and can hurt somebody. You have to be very careful who you let into your life. That's all I have to say. Sexual problems as well, making love. The problems often occur, right? Having sexual intercourse. The partner may be confused by a certain remark, touch, or behavior that brings back memories of the abuse. Patients sometimes don't want to make love at all anymore, or make love less. This can happen to people. Or sometimes they just want to make love more. There is issues with this. My friend was molested as a child, and she was an nymphomaniac, and she literally diagnosed an nymphomaniac. She admitted it freely. She was molested as a child. And she didn't like that about herself. It's not that she didn't like her own sexuality or anything like that, but she didn't like being a nymphomaniac. It's rather inconvenient. You know what I mean? To have to be thinking about sex and having sex all the time. And she realized that she had a problem, and she didn't know what to do with that. You know what I mean? It was not her fault. Like, she was molested by her grandfather. You can't even trust your grandparents, man. Sexual relation problems can occur right together with pain while making love, right? Not wanting to make love, problems in getting aroused, problems with orgasms and stuff like this, right? It's a huge issue. And I know for myself, I've had huge issues with this stuff. Because I don't really let any people into my life anyway, and I've only had a couple of partners. I mean, and not going to get into my sex life here on this show. But the issue is, I don't let people into my life anyway, and then when I do, it's the couple of times that I have, it's been sort of something I've had to work through and work around. It's hard. It's incredibly hard to deal with. You know what I mean? And this is something that. Not everybody has these issues, but some people will, and it's just unfortunate because it was not our fault, and we can't get help with this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't sit here and think, well, there's no way I'll ever be able to get help with this, because I know that there is help with this. You know what I mean? With these issues, like my sweetheart's terminally ill. You know what I mean? So there, you know what I mean? Like, there's not much we can do. But the thing is, he's just very sick, right? So it's that's just that type of relationship is over. But it's just it's the idea that people, we should be okay with our bodies, right? We shouldn't be ashamed of our bodies. And I know being sexually abused as a child and being, especially this incest situation with my brother, that it wouldn't have mattered if it was even my brother. It wouldn't have mattered who it was. Child sexual abuse doesn't matter what it is. Molestation, whether it's fondling or molestation or anything like that. That's not the child's fault, right? That is not the child's fault. Whether it's the boy or the girl, that is not your fault. It's not my fault that what happened there. And so I shouldn't be ashamed of my body, right? Because my body's my body, and I need to learn how to love it and how to take care of it. It's a gift. It's a huge gift. But see, I never looked at it that way because it wasn't treated that way. I wasn't treated like a gift. I was treated like something that you kick around, you beat on, you spit on, you throw around, you hurt, right? And also you get to go ahead and sexually use your body, right? I mean, as a child, that's exactly what happened to me. You know what I mean? Just, beaten and burned and spit on and kicked around and just disregarded, disrespected, humiliated, and publicly beaten in public and just treated like garbage. And then it was just perfectly okay that my brother raped and sodomized me and used me for a sex toy for about 7-8 months, And so, it's no wonder I had issues with my body, right? I wasn't treated properly by the very people who were supposed to be showing me how to love my body, how to love myself. So this is the thing, there is help for this stuff, right? And I'm learning. It's a very slow process for me. It's not happening overnight. But I'm definitely learning how to get in touch with that and learn how to love myself, my whole self, my inner self, my inside, my external body, my internal, being. I'm really focusing on like the whole thing because I wanted to learn how to fully love myself, because I figured that's about the only way I'm going to be able to do this and be able to heal and to be able to sort of negate what was done to me in the past, right? So many survivors out here, if you have, if you're looking for information and you can't find anything or whatever, just give me a holler because I know there's a lot of information out there. There's some good info, and if I can help you find anything, let me know. And, if you have a great night, everybody, make sure you reach out and get some help if you are a survivor and you're having a hard time and you're having a hard time coping and you're thinking, man, I don't know. You call it crisis line, but you do whatever you have to do. You do not allow yourself to be destroyed by this at all. I mean, we deserve to go on. We deserve to live. We deserve to have a good life. But it won't happen if we don't take the first step and do the right thing by ourselves. We really have to become our very best our own best friend, our own best advocate, because we have to really fight, you know what I mean? We have to come out from underneath that hellhole, in order to make it. So you make sure you do whatever it is you have to do. Phone a crisis line if you don't have anybody to talk to, but you make sure you stick around, right? Have a great night, everybody. I'll be back on tomorrow morning, one child abuse survivor to another, and I appreciate everybody who's tuning in. Thank you so much. Have yourselves a really good night. Talk to you soon.